Well, good morning. It is good to be back with you here with Plugged In. We'll be in Daniel chapter 3 right after this. Well, welcome back. It is good to be back. I had told you 2 weeks ago that if I felt inspired while we were away to Minneapolis, that I would send something. I obviously didn't feel inspired. Not that I don't care about what we do here, but I was away and just spending some time with the family. Had a wonderful break. Went to my nephew's graduation, high school graduation in Minneapolis. Did some sightseeing, drove around Iowa all day Saturday, coming back, not because we were lost, but went to the Field of Dreams and a couple of other places. But we got back Monday afternoon this past week. Good to be back. It was a good break. But here we are, Daniel chapter 3. If you have your Bibles, you want to follow along, beginning verse 19. When we left, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had stood their ground. We're not going to bow down, and it's because our God is going to save us, and even if he doesn't, we're not going to do this. So we're going to pick up verse 19 and following for this morning. Here's what it says. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the fiery furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the fiery, blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. This morning, what I want to do is draw our attention to a piece of information that is located in the first line of our passage today. Now, we are told that King Nebuchadnezzar was furious. I believe he was beyond furious. I think he was irate. He was ticked off. And yet that's not really the part that I want you to grasp. I want you to notice that we are told this, and his attitude toward them changed. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, for the story that we are reading, I believe it points to the truth that Nebuchadnezzar didn't like being made a fool. He didn't like that these men were being disrespectful to his position as a king, and he did not like that they were being disobedient to his authoritative orders. But what really made old Nebi upset was that these men had a stronger conviction in believing in their God who would save them, and even if he didn't, they were not going to bow down to the idol. They were willing to die for their faith in God. That didn't set good for Nebuchadnezzar. For a while, he respected them. But when he gave a direct order, he expected for it to be followed. And you know what? We are beginning to see very clearly in our nation that when we as Christians stand for the truth, we are going to be hated. You know, there was a time when there was a sense of respect across the board, so to speak, across the aisle, across the street, with your next door neighbor. Even when when there was those who were not followers of God, or they didn't attend church, they still had a respect for the moral code of the Ten Commandments, or even the Golden Rule. The one that Jesus said when he said, "So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets." There was a time in which there was a respectfulness between believers and non-believers, churchgoers and non-churchgoers. That's not the way we live in society today. In fact, some of the civil war that's going on, unfortunately, happens within the church, because we have allowed for the worldly views to take over in there. And so we bring in our own ideas and our own opinions. There is a civil war going on. And it's not involving guns and cannons. They're not being used, but instead it is words of hatred and signs of protest. Why is it that we as Christians are being attacked by the very ones who scream and or yell for peace, love, and tolerance? Well, I believe the following scriptures help to answer that question. For example, in Proverbs 29:10, bloodthirsty men hate a man of integrity, and they seek to kill the upright. Jesus said in John chapter 3, "This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but men loved darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil." Or here's the writing from Paul to Timothy during the first century. "But mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control. They will be brutal. They will be lovers of not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God." That gives to you and I a pretty clear picture as to why we are being attacked. That is why non-believers' attitudes have changed toward believers. We're being forced to either believe what they want us to believe, or we are thrown into the fire. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood strong for the Lord, and it upset the king. It was 3 men against a king and his army. So what happened? Well, if you grew up in church and Sunday school, you know the rest of the story. We'll save it for next week. But I would ask that you allow for me to share with you these words from Jesus that he shared with his disciples, and I believe that they are beneficial for us as we close this morning. They'll appear on your screen, recorded in John chapter 15. Here's what he said to his disciples. "If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belonged to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you." We don't want to be hated. but we want to be pleasing to God. Now we have to choose which one we really want to follow. Do we want God, or we want the world? Or do we want God and the world? That's not the way it works. I want to challenge you with that, to have the same attitude of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to understand again that when you stand for the truth, you will be opposed. People's attitudes will change towards you. But in the end, you will hear these words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Thank you again for joining us this week. Please like and share this, pass it on, and we'll see you next week on Plugged In.